Hello and welcome to another interview episode of the Primary Maths Podcast, the show where we talk all things primary maths. I'm your host, John Cripwell. Each week on the podcast, we explore the ideas, research, classroom stories, and practical approaches that can help children experience maths as something they actively do, not just something that they sit and watch. If you've listened to recent episodes, you know that we've talked a lot about cognitive engagement, oracy, problem solving, confidence, belonging, and what it really means for children to be thinking hard in maths. Today's conversation fits beautifully into that bigger picture because we're talking about active maths lessons. Now, before anyone starts moving the tables to the side of the room or checking the risk assessment folder, this is not an episode about children simply running around the classroom. It's about movement with purpose. Movement that supports attention, memory, participation, language, confidence, and mathematical thinking. My guests today are Bryn Llewellyn from Move and Learn, Paula Manser, head teacher at Birkby Infant and Nursery School, and Danielle Laramie, maths lead and assistant head teacher at the same school. Together, we explore what active learning might look like in practice, how it could support children with EAL and SEND in particular, how it links with a mastery approach, and how simple routines embedded well can make a real difference. There's some lovely practical examples in this one, including, of course, cones, cups, ticks and crosses games, partner talks, sentence stems, and a reminder that sometimes the simplest ideas are the ones that can have the biggest impact when they become part of the everyday rhythm of a classroom. As always, if you enjoy the episode, please do subscribe or follow the podcast wherever you listen so you never miss an episode. It also really helps as if you can leave us a rating or a quick review or share the episode with a colleague who might find it useful. You can always get in touch with the show by emailing us, primarymathspodcast@twinkle.co.uk, and you can also find me on LinkedIn, where I'd love to hear how you're using movement, talk, and active learning in your own maths lesson. After this episode, we'll be back, of course, on Friday with another After Maths episode where I'll be joined by Becky again, back off her travels. But in the meantime, let's get moving, sensibly, purposefully, and without anyone launching themselves over a chair, please. My guests today are Bryn, Paula and Danielle, and I'm delighted to have them on the show. So, as ever, I'd just like to start by asking my guests to introduce themselves. Bryn, maybe if we could start with you.
Oh, yeah. Way back in the time, a male in a primary school, I became the PE lead by default, and then ascended the scale and became deputy head teacher, acting head teacher in various schools, mostly in Bradford, some in London. And then after a while, I realised that all I was doing was getting kids to pass SATs. So created Tagtivate, which is a way to take maths and English beyond the classroom. Think TIG, tag rugby, meeting Scrabble, meeting countdown. And then on the back of a piece of research by Dr. Andy Daly-Smith, he suggested why not bring movement into the classroom. So that's where we formed Move and Learn as a community interest company. And that's where I met Paula, because Paula's school was one of the first case studies to come on board.
Fantastic, which is a lovely segue, Paula, into a little introduction from yourself.
Yeah, so I'm Paula Manser. I have been head at Birkby Infants since September. So it's very new and very different to what I was doing previously. I've been assistant head at Birkby for the last 9 years, leader of year 2, PE lead, and introduced active learning about 6 years ago. And from then on, we've kind of got everybody on board and developed it further. So we've made it our own. We've had a number of visitors who come to see what active learning looks like at our school. And I've got a fabulous team of staff who embed it.
One of whom is sat next to you at the moment. Morning, Danielle. Are you okay to introduce yourself as well?
Yeah, absolutely. I'm Danielle Laramie. I've been at Birkby Infant School for many, many years, probably around 27 years. I'm currently the maths lead. I'm also a year 1 lead and one of the assistant heads. I'm fully on board with active learning. Paula came after going to one of Bryn's conferences and was very enthusiastic about it. After hearing more about it and implementing it in the class, I'm a really strong advocate for active learning and really see the benefits for not just for teachers but the staff, the pupils as well.
Fantastic. Just tell me a little bit more about the school, because it's always interesting. I always think as a teacher, one of the best things that you can do is go and have a wander around another school and see what's going on there. It's always interesting to look behind the curtain. What sort of school is it? What sort of community do you serve?
So we are a fourth form entry infant school. So we have 120 pupils in reception year 1 and year 2. We also have a 102 place nursery as well.
Wow,
so,
that's a huge nursery.
Yeah, so we have a number of very little children on site. We are in a very multicultural area. We have a number of children who join us with a range of EAL needs. So 84.9% of our cohort is EAL, and 25.6% are SEND. So we also have an alternative provision on site as well, which we run and staff with our teachers and staffing. So we have a huge number of EAL children. We have a high mobility. So again, we have a number of children who leave and join throughout the year. So the classes are very used to adapting provision to address the needs of the children that join us.
I think by the end of year 2, the cohort we started with in reception has changed by nearly 50%.
Wow. Well, that's huge.
High levels of mobility, yeah.
Mobility, yeah. And I always think that's tricky, particularly from a maths point of view sometimes, because maths is so sort of sequential in its learning, the building blocks and things that come before each concept, that you can never necessarily be sure what's happened before in a different school, because not everybody follows the same sequence of learning, do they?
A lot of our children will join without any schooling as well. So,
right.
We've just had a child who joined year 2, no previous schooling. So you're obviously expected to pick up a year 2 curriculum, but yet you've never had any formalised education. So we have.
And I realise this is not what we were planning to talk about this morning, but just I know that listeners will be curious. How do you address that? How do you tackle that?
In multiple ways. One of the ways is we do have a special planning adapted that is for, we call it new entrants. So we're very well aware of children have come without any previous schooling. So we need to build on that really strong number sense that they may have missed in EYFS. So we have delivered and tailored our own planning scheme to support these new children that do arrive in school mid-year. But the active learning really does support those children as well, because often oracy is an issue, and EL children where active learning, they don't rely on answering questions orally. They're able to take part in the lessons in a much more active and in different ways, to ways that we are able to support the children.
Okay, well, let's hear a little bit more about active learning then. So what do we mean, I suppose, by active maths? Is it about movement? Is it about thinking? What in this context, what are we thinking about this morning? But Bryn, maybe you're best placed to answer that one.
Yeah, I think first and foremost we need to remember it in terms of what is it not? It's not running around the classroom. And I could tell an anecdote about
risk assessment waiting there, isn't there? Yeah.
So, funnily enough, as I said, we used to be a former school leader, and we were invited to the NAHT conference to do a motion proposal one year. And the motion proposal was, let's look at active learning or move and learn solutions because it has health and education outcomes. And 9 out of 10 head teachers said, yeah, we'll look at that. So it got voted through. And then the Independent did a feature on it, and that was really good. But the Telegraph's headline was, let them run around the classrooms, head teachers urged. Obviously, that's not what Ian said. It's not what I said. But yeah, so that's what it's not. It's definitely not running around the classroom. Our latest iteration of moving and learning, it's the integration of movement into learning and play, but it's movement with purpose and meaning.
Yeah, to add to that, so the learning intention remains at the forefront, as achieved through practical, interactive and purposeful tasks that help keep children involved. So children are actively involved in their learning rather than sitting for long periods of time passively listening.
It's interesting. I saw a social media post, and I've been trying to find the piece of research that it links to, and I haven't tracked it down yet. But I saw that this morning that I think it was on Instagram. They were showing some findings saying basically that some research had been done about maths activities and adding movement to them, and how that help children to stay more engaged in the lesson, which is something that I'm particularly interested in at the moment. And I know that there's been a few studies, one that I was reading about in Sweden that was talking about how daily movement in teaching practices, particularly in maths, has been embedded now and really part of their sort of daily routines now. And again, it's the outcomes seem to be that engagement in the lesson. However you sort of measure engagement, I think that's probably the tricky bit for me at the moment. Is what do we mean by that? But I'm really interested in how those children that sometimes drift off in a lesson or sort of opt out of it, how this might help some of those children to re-engage. So what might a typical what does this look like? I suppose we know it's not running around the classroom. So what does it look like? What does it look like at your school?
Yeah, I'm just jumping in there in terms of we said what it's not and we talked about what it is, but obviously like teachers look at the research and the evidence, and like we look towards Rosenshine initially and his 10 principles, and we realized that 10's too many to remember. So we stripped it back to 5. And so there are 5 move and learn approaches, from retrieval to collection to modeling to connection and creation. And as well as those activators, we've got energizers. And I still hate the term like brain gym, etc., and brain breaks, etc. They're not. These are energizers that break up the learning into bite-sized chunks, and it breaks up the sedentary time, and it allows the children to like refocus and recharge.
And what does that look like in year 1, for instance? Having worked in primary schools for 20 odd years, I know in different settings, and I'm not a Key Stage 1 specialist, certainly not an early years specialist. I used to think early years was a bit of a scary place, really, although I did come to love it in my final few years in school. But I know from my own daughter's experience of moving from reception into year 1, that idea of a sedentary classroom in some schools is very much a reality, even in year 1. And I know your school is an infant school, but you're moving from a very active, potentially very active situation in reception into year 1, and we're sometimes expecting children to be sat at desks working on workbooks or worksheets and things for large periods of the day, and that seems a massive jump to me. How do you approach that at your school, Paul?
Yeah, it's definitely not. I think some people have a misconception that it's a bolt-on added extra. So maybe after 10 minutes, we'll all stand up and do 10 star jumps, or after 15 minutes, we'll put on a brain break. It definitely is not that. It actually is part and parcel of the lesson, and it's carefully interweaved. So actually, it just becomes part of the whole mastery approach. It really coincides with the mastery approach really well in supporting attention span, as you've mentioned, working memory and cognitive load, by breaking learning into small manageable chunks. So as a lesson progresses and we're wanting to check learning, we'll think, actually, how can the children demonstrate their learning to me so that everybody is participating, everybody's involved, and I'm not just waiting for hands up? Because actually, sometimes that just relies on 3 or 4 children. They're all of the same children that are always contributing. I want to have a blanket approach. And I also want learning to be fun, so that children think, I really want to respond. So a lesson might start off with a quick revisit and review. I'm just thinking off the top of my head, this week we've been looking at counting in 10s. So the children have a cone, like you see in P, in front of them or with a partner, and I've put on the screen some 10s frames, and the children have got to pick up the cone when they see, is it 10 or is it not? So it's a bit gamification, but gamification through purposeful meaning, revisit and review. So straight away the children are hooked. They think they're playing a game, but actually it's a mastery approach and revisit and reviewing. So the children would sit with a partner. I would put something on a smart board. When you see 10, pick up the cone before your partner. Pick up the cone when they see 10, and then you say, how do you know? Convince me. So your mastery approach, your reasoning, your fluency is all part and parcel of that. Then we would move on to your wall and explaining what the learning is going to be about. And then once you've taught your fluency, there'd then be another opportunity for children to demonstrate their learning in various ways. We have got an array of activities that children are familiar with, that are able to enhance their learning experience. So we've got a tick and cross game, we've got a cup game. There's so many games that the children now, because it is so well embedded, you don't have to explain the game. They know when they see the grid game, this is what I need to do.
That sounds fantastic. I'd love to see that at some point. Bryn, is this something that you just do with infant schools? Is this across primary? Do you go into secondary? What's it look like?
No, it works right the way into Key Stage 2 lower, Key Stage 2 upper. What we're trying to do now is to try and do some work with Year 7s, those children maybe in intervention programs who didn't grasp things in the primary school. But yeah, it's kind of like, there was a piece of research by the Education Endowment Foundation, and they looked at research in terms of like early years and Key Stage 1, and they recognised that there was evidence that body movement and gestures help children to learn mathematics. So, for example, moving along a number line or clapping games. So, an anecdote from a school down in Cambridgeshire, and we had the number tags on the floor of the hall, but the children were putting them into agility ladders, so the children could see the patterns between red, yellow, odd, even, odd, even, odd, even. And I just asked this one little girl, said, "Can you go along the number line?" And she starts like doing hopscotch in terms of like 0, 5, 10, 15, 20. And I'm thinking, this is so good, but asked her why. And I thought she was going to talk about odd and even, and she just said like 5 toes, 10 toes. And that was her way of describing odd and even. And then, when you talk to the children, and Danielle's already said this, the movement is the hook for some of the children, but it's the questioning that goes during the activity and after the activity. So it's, moving and learning, but I think sometimes we've missed a trick there and we should have called it learning by moving. I don't know.
Yeah. And I think that's probably the bit that some teachers might be concerned about, that it's it's disruptive to lessons. We want, I'm not saying that this is what we want, but sometimes, the feeling is, I've always pushed back about this idea about quiet classrooms. As you know, anybody who listens to the podcast regularly will know I'm a huge advocate for oracy, and I want to hear buzz in the classroom and children talking and discussing things, noticing things, conjectures, generalizations, all those good things. But it can, I would imagine, if I was thinking about this as a newly qualified or ECT, that I don't want to lose control of the class with children, as you say, running around the classroom. We've already said it's not running around the classroom, but in what way is it not disruptive, I suppose, to the learning? How do you make sure that the learning comes first, if you see what I mean, and that these then approaches support that rather than take away from it?
I think because the lessons are active, it actually does the opposite. It helps children to remain focused and to remain motivated. I think it's like, when you get a new class in autumn term, it's about making sure that you embed those simple routines consistently and effectively. So actually it comes part and parcel of everyday life. So the children have become really familiar with the expectations. And the games, we call them the active learning games that are introduced, are so simple and actually do not require lots of resource, and it's actually part and parcel of your lesson now, that actually if you came and saw it in practice, you'd be like, wow, the behaviour is exceptional. The children are fully focused, fully engaged, and because they're actively involved, the behaviour is easier to manage. Is definitely my experience.
Well, that's great to hear. And from a planning point of view then, how easy is it to incorporate these things into a lesson design from a planning point of view? Is it a bank of games that you can teach children and then use it in different scenarios, different situations, and choosing the best one for whatever concept it is that you're teaching? Or are these pre-planned things? What does that look like?
Yeah, they're definitely pre-planned and thought through. When we do have a bank of lessons, because the children need, so that lessons are interrupted, it doesn't it doesn't ruin the flow of the lesson, that children are aware of expectations and are aware of what is expected for each game. So we definitely do have a bank. And then, like you say, it's about which is the most pertinent to the learning intention, which will help me to consolidate, like the mastery approach, in small chunks, this objective for the lesson.
Fantastic. And Bryn, how do you approach that? How do you see that working?
I was speaking to a head teacher who actually visited Birkby the other day, and he said it's simple things embedded well. And I think sometimes we complicate too many things in education. Yeah. And, as Danielle's just described there, in terms of games like Cup It and Cone Reflex and Tick Tick Cross, those games, the children get used to it, but then they can apply it to phonics, to spelling, to science, to geography, to history, as well as to the mathematics as well. So I wish I'd thought of that when that head teacher said it to me. It's simple things embedded well.
Yeah.
And again,
we know that children, when we can teach children a routine and things, lots of children like routines, and they like knowing, what's coming next and how to engage in lessons and things. So I can imagine that teaching the games initially, and then they become a more seamless part of the lesson, I suppose.
Yeah, the routines become automatic, so this does not distract from the learning at all. And because it's a whole school approach, we are also mindful to build on maybe games that reception have done. So actually, it's still fresh, it's still innovative in between each year group as well.
Yeah. No, that makes really good sense.
The other thing that I'd like to point out is terms of when visitors go to Birkby to see moving and learning in action, they'll often come away in terms of, like, the comment that keeps on jumping out is in relation to the children understanding the why. And I know I've seen Danielle teaching many, many times, and she keeps on talking about it goes into the short-term memory, and why do we do this? To go into the long-term memory. And there's lots of, like, call and responses. So the children it's not just the behavior, as in traditional behavior, it's those learning behaviors, I think, and it's the why. We come back to the why we do this. It's not a gimmick. It's not a novelty. It works as well as it plays. Yeah.
And as you say, that there's rigorous research that backs up the approach as well. You mentioned that you have quite a high incidence of SEND, or certainly 25%. I'm not sure whether we describe that as high or what, but for those pupils at your school that do have potential barriers to engaging in maths lessons, is this an approach that supports them as well, or is it another thing to that might be a challenge?
Just as you would in a maths lesson, adaptations are also evident within any of the games that we play to support children. Like I mentioned before, it supports children with the EAL, as participants not always reliant on giving oral answers, and children are able to demonstrate their understanding through actions, partner work, different resources, or through the games themselves. So it definitely does support the EAL aspect. I know I've got 2 little girls that have just arrived, never been to school before, but actually that is one thing that they can have success about is the games that we do in the active learning.
Yeah, so that's really good to hear. If somebody's interested in exploring this further, what might be a nice way to begin with this and see whether it's something that will fit with their approach to learning?
Where would they go first of all? If you lived locally to Huddersfield and West Yorkshire, I would say, like, go to Birkby Infant and Nursery School, and you can see it in action. And their fame is definitely spreading because they've had visits recently, I know, from schools in Manchester, Burnley, Blackburn, etc. If you don't have a hub school on your doorstep, I would say, like, I could do a shameless plug for the book called How to Move and Learn, but I'm not going to do that, obviously.
No, absolutely. You can, Bryn. That's absolutely fine. And we can put a link to it because we want to make it easy for people to find resources like this. So if there's a resource that you think would be useful, and obviously we'll put a link to the website and things in the show notes as well. But that's absolutely fine. So, what was the name of the book again?
It's called How to Move and Learn, and it's written by Ian Holmes, myself, and Rich Ullman. It's published by Crown House. I hasten to add that Ian writes the long sentences. I just write the short sentences. But the two of them do work together. So, And again,
Fantastic.
the thing that I would suggest that, be curious in terms of to see what's out there. And as I have referenced, it works as well as it plays. It's not a gimmick. The research is there from like Dr. Andy Daly-Smith, who's now Professor Andy Daly-Smith. There's massive work internationally by G.K. Reseland and others. And as I say, it does make a difference. I had a conversation with somebody who works for NHS the other day, and we were talking about obesity levels and inactivity levels. And she said, like, you don't need to measure it. You just need to look. And as I say, once, you get a chance to see these children responding to move and learn approaches at Birkby and other schools, you can see the difference it makes. I did a session, oh, bless. It was a little lad called Ethan down in Leicester, and it was a 45-minute active learning session. And at the end of it, he just came up to me with like sweat, big smile on his face. And he said, like, I used to think I was rubbish at maths, but now I know I'm not. And again, if you can transform one kid's attitude or disillusionment with maths to something that he thinks he's successful at, I think we talk about narrowing the gap all the time. And I do think that the move and learn approaches definitely work for those children who struggle in a normal way of learning.
Yeah.
There was an event the other day, and somebody said it was Ruth Swales, and she said, children don't learn to sit by sitting, they learn to sit by moving. And I do think the move and learn approaches work in terms of the gross motor skills, the fine motor skills, and it does help with the body posture. And I've seen Danielle and other teachers at her school using like yoga poses. So the question goes on the board and they've got multiple choice answers, and they show the answer with a yoga pose. And it's probably cottage at the beginning with kids not being able to balance, but by the end of it, you've got children who learn to stand still, they learn to sit still, but also the thing that's not still will be the brain, because the brain's actually thinking about the questions and how they can process it to get the answers.
Well, it makes sense, doesn't it? Because we've all, even as adults, we've all been in those long meetings or professional development sessions and things where, after that tricky, I deliver quite a lot of professional development, and, occasionally I end up with the tricky after lunch session for the first hour. And I try to find ways of making sure that it is an active learning session in that time, because otherwise people are, after 10 minutes or so, you're sitting there starting to drift off looking at what's going on outside the window. And yet we expect very young children to be focused and engaged with the learning all the while. And I think, as I say, I think oracy is a big part of that, making sure that there's active learning in so much as that talking and working with partners and things like that. But I love the idea of incorporating movement into this as well, and making it an active session in that way as well. I think that's
an amazing point there in terms of the oracy. Do you want to just like chip in there, Danielle, with the essence in terms of the importance of the sentence stems within your teaching and learning?
Yeah, we're very big on being a majority of our children being EAL learners. We're very big on the oracy side, so that is definitely part and parcel of the move and learn as well. That actually oracy forms part of every game and activity that we do, and the children are expected to speak in full sentences. So as soon as we have done an active learning, there's always a questions followed up to convince me, prove it to me, show me how to do that, but with the sentence stem, so that the children are able to parent talk with their partner. But even that's a simple thing. So back in the day, I do parent talk with the children sat down, but now it's like stand up and talk to your partner, because actually that standing up increases the blood flow to the brain. So just being able to stand up and talk to your partner and then sit back down is a tiny little minute thing, but actually makes a difference within the lesson. But I think one thing that visitors do know is the oracy of our children and the vocabulary that they can use, because active learning is well embedded. It's those little things done right daily and rehearsed and revisited constantly.
I totally agree, Danielle. Well, I'm curious, just listening to you talking there. You've got, as you say, 4 form entry, 120 children in each year group, and 4, at least 4 teachers per year group. I'm guessing in some cases more with part-time staff. How have you embedded that across your school? How long has it taken to get to this point, do you think?
You know,
Yeah,
sorry.
go on.
I will be open and honest. We've probably been on this journey, probably 5 or 6 years now. And when Paula first came back and explained about what she's seen and this new idea, there were staff who were a bit hesitant and thought, actually, the learning intentions will be lost. It's very gimmicky. I don't see the benefits of it. But slowly but surely, with modelling good practice, staff, observing each other, going, actually, I can see how that is working. I can see the impact it's having in maths. I can see how it correlates really effectively with a mastery approach, that going back, that rehearsing, those small steps, chunking learning down. Everybody now, I don't think there is one teacher who would say, I would ever go back to teaching without active learning. I know I certainly could not. So it's definitely been a journey. And there's some people, as with anything, are on the journey straight away. There's other people that took a bit longer, and actually they needed to do their own research. That was not necessarily a bad thing. They needed time to invest in it, to go away, to research, to read Bryn's book, and then to be able to come on the journey with us. And a lot of CPD and a lot of modelling and watching each other's lessons have really helped with that. And also sharing good practice. Have you thought about this idea? Or I've seen this. How could we make this work? I really like this for a maths lesson. But I'm not quite sure if the learning intentions is the focus or how can we adapt it. So we do a lot of cooperative planning and CPD.
Yeah, so you've clearly invested a lot of time into it as well, but also realised that
we have invested a lot of time, but it's not onerous on time. I don't want people to think, wow, this sounds like it's a lot of effort, a lot of hard work. It really, really isn't. The hard work comes at the beginning when you're training the children about these games and how they work. But once they've learnt one game, then it's applicable to every subject area you teach. So in terms of a teacher, that's what we did. We started off with like one game. We started off with one really simple game called the tick and cross game, which we used in phonics, where once children learnt a phoneme, they then had some sentences around the room with a picture underneath. They had to read the sentence. Did the sentence match the picture? They put a tick or a cross. So they were standing up, they were moving around the room, reading sentences, and that then tick across game then it found itself into maths, right? Is it a multiple of 10? Is it not a multiple of 10? So it's about starting small, embedding one key game or one key idea, getting children well established, everybody understanding the purpose behind it, and then rolling it out and then starting on your next game. So to begin with, we didn't have 5 or 6 games in our bank. We maybe had one that we rolled out and really got the routines and expectations and made sure that actually the learning intention was at the forefront.
I really like that. I wasn't necessarily saying that it was a huge investment in effort, but I'm just conscious sometimes that in schools we work to very narrow time frames. Sometimes we expect to see results and complete changes and things within, sometimes a term, sometimes a year. We work in these cycles of half terms, terms and years. And I think it's always worthwhile sometimes just taking a step back and thinking, actually, if we're going to, lead long-term sustainable change, these things take a little bit longer to embed and to see the benefits of. That's why sometimes I think in teaching, occasionally you introduce something and you get an experienced teacher at the back of the classroom who sort of rolls their eyes and says, yes, we did this 20 years ago. And it can feel like fads in teaching sometimes. But I just think that, sometimes it's worthwhile taking a little bit longer to explore an idea and a concept and making sure that it is truly embedded and that you're seeing the benefit of it.
Yeah,
and it isn't then, something that cycles round to something that we used to do and now we're doing again.
No, it definitely has been a journey,
Yeah, it sounds like it. But Bryn, how long do you typically work with a school before, if you are doing that, before you begin to feel like it's having an impact in terms of attainment, because that's what we measure now, isn't it? So how long would you expect for something like this to have that sort of impact?
There are too many cases when people have like a one-off staff training meeting about a certain thing and then it's not embedded. It might be introduced, but it's certainly not embedded. So we found that our best approach is over a year and a term. So first session, we look at culture and ethos, we look at the why, and we look at the local data about inactivity levels, obesity levels, all the data that comes from Sport England and Active Life Survey. We contextualize it. Then we look at the approaches, and I've referenced Rose and Shine and those activators that we use and the energizers. We look at resources. Obviously, there's Tagtivate, but we look at like the low cost, no cost resources. And Danielle's reference bringing PE cones and other PE resources into the classroom. So we look at resources, and we also look at environments. Not just the physical environment, it's about the social environment. It's about empowering the teachers to actually trial these approaches and giving them, encouragement to look and try things differently. I'll just come back to the environments. Some schools go down the environment route first because they can see that makes the biggest difference to create a bigger space in terms of like, most teachers are hoarders. We always keep that stuff thinking, I'm going to use that for next year. And it goes in a cupboard and it just stays in the cupboard forever. But if you actually strip out the stuff and it go down the less is more approach, there's more room for the children to move around the classroom purposefully and meaningfully. In terms of like, when I go to Birkby, I know it's an infant and nursery school, but each class has got a big carpet space and the children are in learning lines. And again, bringing it back to the culture, the why, and the learning behaviours, I think that's the crucial element. The other thing is to find like your key allies. Quite often you'll have one person within a school who wants to try it, but it's that small steps make the biggest difference. Who can that key driver have as a key ally, and how do you bring on more people and eventually all people?
Yeah, and I think that's a really nice way of doing it. I've certainly used that approach several times in the past, which is to try something in 1 or 2 classrooms or 1 or 2 year groups, and then if you can see it working there, it's an easier thing to sort of distribute further within the school, isn't it? Well, thank you so much for I'm sure that there's been already so much that people can take away from this, and I just love the idea of this relatively simple approach that can make a big difference to maths lessons. So if anybody would like to find out a little bit more, perhaps about this particular scheme or just moving and learning in general, where's the best place to go for further information, Bryn?
I'm sure we'll be able to put like email addresses and website addresses on the end of the podcast.
Yep, we'll put them in the show notes. Absolutely no problem.
Yeah. As I say, like Paula and Paula's colleagues, how many visitors? It's in hundreds now, isn't it?
Well, I think it was 254 last year. I think we was counted. So
wow.
So yeah.
Well, I mean, I am. I'll speak to you afterwards, Paula, but I would love to come and see for myself. So maybe we can make that 255. Thank you so much for all of you for taking the time this morning. I know how difficult it is in a busy school to find half an hour to come and have a chat about maths, but I really, really appreciate it, and I know the listeners will too. Thank you so much. For the listeners, I will be back on Friday with Becky with another Aftermaths episode. But I would love to hear how you are incorporating movement and activity into your learning in maths or in other lessons. So please do get in touch. primarymathspodcast@twinkle.co.uk. Otherwise, we'll see you on Friday. I hope you have a great week.